everyone. I have had a few questions on how to get better at painting trees. This especially happened after I released my Wonderland watercolor workshop. So I just wanted to do a quick tutorial on some suggestions that I have to help you get better at creating trees in your landscape. So this is the general idea of what we're going for. These are basic, just evergreen pine trees. And a lot of difference you can see, of course, in the ones that are in the front than in the distant trees. So my suggestion is, before you start to create in watercolor and paint, if you're having difficulties with this, put the paintbrush away for a while and just pick up your pencil. So the basic concept, I'm going to do a couple of little ranges here. If you have trees that are in the distance and trees that are in the foreground, of course the trees in the distance are going to be smaller and lighter, and that just gives the illusion of depth. So I'll start with these tiny trees. These I start with a trunk and zigzag back and forth in the basic shape of a triangle. So if you think about it, like there's your trunk, and from each side creating that triangle look there and zigzagging back and forth within those parameters of that triangle. These you definitely want to vary in size, so some will be taller, some shorter, and when you paint them, of course, they're going to be much lighter. And you don't really want to go into too much detail on those distant trees, so really you want to get in, put your paint down, do your little zigzags, and get out. So we'll kind of focus on doing the larger trees, as I think this is where most people run into a problem. So I start the same way with a trunk, so just a straight line, and I'm going to go ahead and draw that triangle shape. And you can do this too, just as a guideline while you're drawing. This is just in an inexpensive sketchbook, so feel free to mess up as many times as you'd like. So we'll do some TP trees here. So I've got my triangle shape in, and I start at the top. And remember that when you are looking at an evergreen tree, so in nature, these trees are not going to be perfectly symmetrical when you look at them, because you've got limbs that are kind of coming out from the sides, of course, like this. But also remember that there are limbs that are coming towards you, and there are limbs on the other side that are going away from you. So keep that all in mind. It will give the illusion that there are limbs here. These limbs might be coming out like this. Then you've got these side limbs, and also limbs in the back. So nothing is going to be perfectly symmetrical. As I draw them, you know, there will be areas that will come out to these TP lines. Some will extend a little bit. There will be areas where the limb does not come out to the side. It maybe just is either coming this way, or maybe there are just small limbs there. So you don't want to have it where you've got a trunk and you've got a perfect limb all the way down, because that's not how they look. It's not realistic. It's not how they're found in nature. So you want to vary things and think about the shape of how trees are in nature. So I just continue this process. And you can see my pencil strokes will very much match when I start to paint. So I'm kind of going back and forth, zigzagging. If I make these a little bigger, you can see this shape here. It's a bit of a zigzag back and forth. And just like Bob Ross, we are just making this up. Maybe a happy little limb lives here. Maybe a happy little limb lives there. It's really great to practice with pencil, because you feel a little more free, because you know you've got an eraser that's got your back. So it helps you to really get the flow of it and the idea of what you want your shape to be. And I always, even when I'm painting, I come back and I'll add a little more depth right around this trunk area. Because also remember, so I just draw a straight line for my trunk, but trunks are a TP shape as well, because as they come to the top, they're much thinner. As they come to the ground, they get much thicker. So I like to add a little more shading and a little more depth right into the middle of my tree to give the illusion of some depth there. So basic idea, it is this TP triangle shape, but we want to have variation within the limbs, thinking about how limbs grow. And these are so much fun to practice. You could just do a whole line of these trees in pencil. It's a lot of fun. So now I'll show you how I do it with a paintbrush. Okay, so now I'm going to begin to show you how I paint with watercolor. And the basic idea is that I do the same thing with my paintbrush that I did with my pencil. So for this first one, I'm actually going to go right over my pencil marks, and I kind of suggest you do the same thing. I think it's just good practice. Obviously, when you go to create your final painting, you're not going to do this. You're not going to have that many pencil strokes. But I think that it really helps to kind of get your muscle memory going. So I like to use a small brush. As you can see, this one is so well used. I don't actually know the size anymore, but if I had to guess, I would say it's a 2. And as far as colors, this is where I kind of deviate from what's in nature. I really will use the colors that I've already used within my painting. So I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. But for now, I'm just grabbing, I have here phthalo turquoise, and it's very watery. I'm going to show you how watery it is on my palette. You can see, so I don't like to go too dark or too thick with the paint, so make sure you're using watery paint. And once again, just going right over those pencil lines, using the same type of motion that I did when I was drawing. And you don't have to get it perfect on the first pass. So in other words, just let your brush kind of dance along those lines. But as you can see, I'm not filling in every space. So really just letting my paint flow and letting my brush dance against those limbs. Sometimes when I get towards the bottom, as things get a little larger, I will grab another brush. So this is like a size 4, and create the larger limbs with a little bit bigger brush. So your brush size makes a big difference, of course, on how your brush strokes will look. And then you can always, I like to just come back with a small brush, and you can add little tendrils coming from some of those edges just to give it a little more flair. And I always like to take watery paint of another color. So here I have mauve. This is where, like I said, I kind of deviate from nature. And I just drop in some extra color, whatever I've used within my landscape. And so I'm kind of taking this mauve right down that center section there. And it almost creates some shadows within the other color. So that's the basic of going back over your pencil lines. Like I said, just a really good idea. So once you do that, I'm going to grab a pencil here. I always, when I'm painting without my guidelines, I simply draw in my trunk just to kind of keep me straight as I can be. And now I'm going to do it without pencil lines. So once again, I'm grabbing my phthalo. Let me get the right brush size here. I think this phthalo might actually have a little hooker's green in it as well. So just grabbing some greenish color, starting at the top of my trunk here. and zigzagging back and forth. Like I said, you can see how I don't try to fill in every space, and as I go down, I'm keeping that TP triangle shape in mind as I go down. And when I'm up here, you can see how I hold my brush to get that finest line. I hold my brush more upright, so it allows me to get more of a fine line. As I come down to the bottom, my hand will change so that I can get a thicker line. So this is thinner and then thicker because I'm getting more of the brush within the stroke. So I drop in, now I'm grabbing some wet mauve and just dropping that into some of those center sections and maybe creating a bit of a trunk line there. I've also got some green gold here. I like to use that for highlighting. So there you go. That is the basics of creating a tree. So I created a background on my sketchbook paper just to kind of mimic the same process that we do in class. And just to show you some tips and tricks that I use for creating a tree on watercolor that you've already applied to the paper that is dry. So of course the application process is pretty much the same for just a basic tree. Start at the top, keeping your TP shape in mind. But the difference is that because you've already got watercolor laid down on your background, your colors are going to be a little bit more saturated when you put them down, so they won't be quite as light as this. So I'm just going to do one this way just to show you. And I always have to do my straight pencil line here because otherwise I will get completely crooked. So there's my tree trunk. Grabbing some of my wet phthalo turquoise and starting at the top. And this one I'm going to do pretty quick so you can see sometimes it's best not to really work so much on detail. It really can be good once you've got that muscle memory going to just get in there and get out. Get down the basic shapes, and you can always come back and modify and add more detail as you get the whole shape in. So there's a basic tree. I wanted to show you also, if you see these trees, they're pretty intense, just like this. But these trees, as I move back, they get lighter and lighter. And the way that you do that, of course, in watercolor is you just add more water. So I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So for this one, gotta put my tree trunk in. I'm going to pretend that this one is a little farther in the distance, or maybe that there's some mist rising from the bottom here. So if I start at the top, I have the wrong paintbrush. Got my number 2 here. If I start at the top, just like this one, same intensity of watercolor. Doing my little teepee shapes. Now, as I come to the bottom, I'm putting more water on my brush. More water. And what I'll do also is really kind of scrub at this area. So I'm kind of using my brush, and sometimes I take a cheapy brush that I don't mind messing up and kind of push at the color that's behind. So I'm pushing at my background now. So almost kind of lifting paint away. And once I get that, then I come back in with a paper towel, and you can see how it just creates a bit of a lighter effect there. So almost like you've got or you've just removed some of the color. And while this is still damp, I come back in and just add just the indication of some branches, color here and there. So it almost gives the indication that there's some, mist, or that things are farther away. So you could do a whole tree in this manner and make it look distant, really just almost like an outline of the tree. So the effect is kind of like these, where I've got more intense up here at the top, and then as I came down, things get mistier and mistier. And also, like this tree is starting to dry. Whenever you let the tree dry, if you see that it's lighter than you'd like, if you want to go a little more intense, that's the way that I choose to do it. Is so I lay down my first wash, I let that dry. If I see that I want it more intense, then you can come back over. It also creates a really cool effect because I try not to go exactly on the same zigzags. So I'm creating a whole new layer of branches and things happening within that tree, which can also create a really cool effect. So as you can see, there's all sorts of things start to happen. Really adds a lot of detail within the painting. So that's the end of my tutorial. I hope that this has been really helpful for you, and have lots of fun creating trees, and I'll see you next time.